Good morning. My name is Bryn Long, and my pronouns are he, him. Some of you may know me from, I previously attended here, and I actually spoke to the congregation in 2018. And I was with my wife in attendance. She wasn't my wife at the time. She now is. My wife, Yvonne, and she's here with me today. Currently, I'm the president of Boulder County, sometimes referred to as OBC, which is now the largest LGBTQ nonprofit organization in Colorado and the surrounding states. I participate in a program there that is called Speaking Out, in which members and allies of the LGBTQ community go to churches and schools, colleges, and community centers, and we're asked to share about our life experience as part of the LGBTQ community and provide information for others to learn. So when Claire asked me to speak, she was coming from a place of members of your congregation have inquiring minds. Isn't that wonderful? You have inquiring minds. They were asking her questions about how can we be allies, better allies to the LGBTQ community, to questions of we just don't get all this media coverage about trans athletes and anti-trans legislation across the country. To those that were asking, what is up with this drag story time stuff? And I'm sure there were other questions. So that's why I'm here, to offer you what you might want to call LGBTQ plus 101. This is just the starting point, and I told Claire that I'm available for further discussion. When I attended a small Methodist church in Dallas, Texas, we started a program there that was called Conversation and at the Table. And this was a way for us to have conversation about various topics and just come together and learn from one another. And I think there is a similar goal here at Heart of Longmont. I'm going to share with you some information that may be new for you, and the goal is to clarify some of what you may have heard about the LGBTQ community. So the overarching path for us is to go from confusion, or even sometimes that confusion is conflict, to curiosity, to conversation, to connection, to community. So we can go from curiosity to connecting and have community. So let me start with confusion. We are inundated with so much information, and I think most of us could agree that we are in a world of false narratives and disinformation about so many things. We either ask ourselves, what am I to believe? Or we are in the camp that latches on to the narrative that we hear the most. If it's said over and over from so many sources, then it must be true. Some folks get caught in this echo chamber of false information. So my hope is today that I can clear up some of the confusion, or at least encourage you to be curious enough to ask for clarity. Like so many of us, we grow up living in a cisgender, heterosexual world, or what we consider to be the normative world. And with that lens, we don't realize that there's a whole lot of other people out there not living in that lens and with that lens. We don't realize how they are seeing life and living their lives differently from us. So here's a quick synopsis. And let me just say, I don't know everything there is to know. I can only speak from my experience, what I have learned in conversation, and what I have learned from reading about the things that are central to my life. I don't presume to understand everything, but I still seek wisdom. I will share some of the vocabulary around all this, and we know that the ways we communicate about this is always evolving. LGBTQ folks have always existed, but the terminology to help us identify one another is often changing. Just because this is new vocabulary to you, it doesn't mean that you should be intimidated by it. It doesn't mean that you should be uncomfortable with it. And the approach I have today is, did you know? Did you know? What does the acronym LGBTQ stand for? L is lesbian, G is gay, B is bisexual, T is transgender, Q is often referred to as queer, which for a lot of folks that are older, that's not a nice word. We grew up not hearing that word, and it didn't seem like a nice word. It's now taken on as a word from a lot of folks that it's all-encompassing. Q could also stand for questioning, folks that are in that time of their life where they're questioning. And it can capture all the identities for folks. The plus is also used to maybe capture where someone says they don't fit into the LGBTQ, the LGBT part. The plus can also refer to allies. So I want you to imagine a continuum for understanding some of these next ideas that I share with you. There are layers to our identity. I think most of you can understand that, and each of us have our own identity. Some of this comes from basic biology. Some of our identity is just basic biology. I'm going to give you a short high school biology lesson here in a minute. And some of it comes from our life experience. So nature, nurture, you've heard those terms used. And what we know about ourselves now, we didn't know maybe 5 years ago. Think about that. What I know about myself now, I didn't know 5 years ago. I didn't know about that 10 years ago. I didn't know about that 50 years ago. We are evolving humans. So what makes our identity? How come some of us are drawn to playing sports or athletic? And some of us are more creative and into music and arts, or some of us both. Why do we like a certain flavored ice cream? How do you explain that? I like vanilla. How do you explain that? Why are we drawn to certain people and not to other people? This is influenced by who we are and how we see ourselves. And all of this is on a shifting landscape. This is true for gender identity, who we want to be, and sexual orientation, who we want to be with. Okay? So we have layers to our identity, and they're all on a continuum. So I'm going to walk you through 4 things here. We have our biology or our sex. We have our gender identity. We have our gender expression. And we have our attraction or our sexual orientation. And because of this, we have such variety in our humanity, right? So first, let's start with biology and sex. And this means your anatomical sex, all right? Male, female, and there's even intersex. These are the physical traits that you are born with. You have a sex that you are assigned at birth. What is interesting about this is doctors most often identify you and assign your sex at birth solely by looking at external genitalia, okay? But there's layers to even biological sex. As our bodies grow and change, we discover more about our anatomy that we didn't realize what was known in infancy. Let me give you a short version of this biology, okay? We learned that there are sex chromosomes, right? XX, which was attributed to being female, and XY, which was attributed to being male. And remember, this was something that was not even known before, but along came science to provide information to help us understand the differences of male and female. And what those bodies, why are those bodies different? Today, however, with this evolving scientific knowledge, we have further learned that these chromosomes don't always align in terms of physiology, anatomy, and psychology for some individuals. Did you know that all embryos start out with protogonads? Okay? And in the first 6 to 8 weeks of a pregnancy, they develop into either male or female gonads. The way this happens is there's a gene known as the SRY gene that's on the Y chromosome. And this makes the protogonads turn into testes. And when that happens, then for the male, hormones start coming, okay? And this leads to the development in the fetus of being male anatomy. Without the SRY gene, the protogonads turn into ovaries. And then that's the female hormones that come, and you have the female anatomy. However, there are times when this SRY gene might be missing, or it's dysfunctional, and it can lead to the XY embryo that doesn't develop male anatomy, and the fetus is identified as a female or a girl at birth. Or the SRY gene might show up on the X chromosome, leading an XX embryo to develop, and again, XX, isn't that female? Well, it leads the XX embryo to develop male anatomy, and the fetus is identified as a boy. Now, I know this is a little confusing, but that's what they've seen in exploring all the science. So there's all these genetic variations that occur, just like there's other genetic variations that occur that are not even related to our anatomy. Some variations can include where the sex anatomy internally does not match with the external anatomy. So as a fetus, there's all kinds of things going on in there. Hormones, chemistry, nutrients, all kinds of things that happen. It's not just one way and the other. So that's on that continuum. You never know where that's going to go with that biology. The other continuum is gender identity. What is this gender identity thing? That's a new thing. I haven't heard that. That's how our brain develops for us. That's what our brain develops. How in your head, and I like to say in my heart and soul, you define and experience your gender. It's your personality traits. It's your likes and dislikes. It's your expectations. It's the roles that you have. Again, if you look at the biology of this, the brain develops in the last trimester of the pregnancy. So think about that. Your brain is not developing at the same time that your sexual anatomy is developing. So this is where you can get a different environment for the fetus at different times, and you could be thinking about yourself in a different way. Your head and heart about how you feel about yourself may not match your anatomy. Thus, we have this amalgamation of these elements influencing our physical sex, our anatomy, our gender. Defining gender was actually imposed on us as a way to categorize and communicate how we feel about ourselves and our differences. Our society has identified this or defined this in a certain ways. So you find the term cisgender. That's maybe a new term for a lot of folks. Some people don't understand that, and they hear the word CIS and they think sissy. That's not what that term is. CIS, cisgender, is meaning on the same side, just on the same side. Someone who aligns their identity with the sex that they were assigned at birth. You have transgender, and trans just means opposite or across. And that's for someone, their identity doesn't match their sex assigned at birth. And then you may hear the term non-binary, and for those folks, the identification, they may identify with both men and women, or they may identify with neither. And the discussion we will have at lunch, you all can ask a lot of questions about this if you want to. Also, we need to understand that gender is not binary. It's not an either or. With what I just told you about what we learned in biology, there are not just two genders. In some cases, it's both. For some transgender people, which could be male to female, they were born male with male anatomy, and they want to be, they know for themselves in their heart and soul they're female. Or, so that's referred to as M to F, or you have F to M. Those are folks that are born female, assigned female at birth, but they know themselves in their heart and soul to be male. And they see themselves in that binary. But for others, they don't see themselves in that binary. And it's up to each individual to define for themselves who they are. Only they know what is their best fit. But living in this binary where most people seem to put themselves seems to simplify this either or of life. It's a lot simpler if you're living in that binary. But more people are finding themselves not relating to that binary or seeing themselves in those conventional categories. So we have the biology on a continuum, we have the gender identity on a continuum, now we have gender expression on a continuum. This is how you present to the outside world. Your appearance. This can include how you dress, your hair, your style, your mannerisms, and this has been defined as masculine and feminine. This has evolved, and it varies by culture. By way of example, hair length. Everybody used to think, well, male, you have to have short hair. Female, you have to have long hair, and that varies from culture. There are a lot of males with long hair, and they're honored with long hair. I think we're getting in a time where none of that matters anymore, thank goodness. But it's also the way you dress. Men aren't supposed to wear makeup and earrings. Who says? Why is it defined that way? Then on the last thing on the continuum is your sexual orientation and your attraction. So this is who you're drawn to or not drawn to another person in a romantic or sexual or physical way. Our language has defined that if you want to be with someone of the same sex, it's homosexual. If you want to be someone of the opposite sex, it's heterosexual. And you may hear the term bisexual. And what this just means is someone who's physically attracted to both male and female. You may hear the term pansexual. And what this means is someone that's attracted to any gender identity or expression. Or it's sometimes used where there's not really a physical attraction, it's an emotional attraction. It starts out as an emotional attraction first. You may hear the term asexual or ace, and that just means people who don't experience a sexual attraction. Again, remember, all these layers are on a continuum, and they can change throughout your lifetime. And the knowledge and ways of understanding this can change over your lifetime. I remember growing up, and I never heard the word transgender. What is that, Think back on how for a long time it was okay to be a girl and to be a tomboy. We were kind of okay with that. But when she reached puberty, she could no longer express her masculine side. What was even harder to accept is if a boy was trying to express his feminine side, no, we can't have that, or we called him a sissy. We created these constructs, or boxes of acceptable and normal behavior and expression. Who decides? Throughout history and cultures, there were times when men wore wigs and stockings and robes, long garments, not pants that we know of today. Did you know in the 1890s and early 20th century, in order to sell more children's clothing, the manufacturers color-coded clothes? And they branded pink, which was seen as a stronger color for boys, and blue, which was seen as a dainty color for girls. This changed in the 1940s, and the colors switched. See how this is a societal construct? Okay. We can also think about how we changed our mindset from a focus of sexual activities as purely for procreation, and we began to see that it's okay for people to be single or for couples to not have children. This does not prevent the rest of us folks in our community, the rest of folks, from continuing evolution and to populate our world. In an ideal world, people would feel free to express and live their gender identity and sexual orientation freely. But that is not the case. There's a stigma. There's discrimination. We are living in a time where there is hatred that is becoming more and more outwardly expressed toward LGBTQ folks that threatens their lives. There's so much violence. There's so much, we got to legislate this. We got to take away their expression, their rights, their freedoms. And so much of this is happening with hateful rhetoric and false information. You need to fear them. No, you don't. Reflecting back on the scripture that was shared with you today, I found these verses very helpful for me as I journey to understand myself and to understand others. It's about the pursuit of wisdom. My parents often said to me, yearn to learn. And the book of Proverbs is a wisdom literature. And it's kind of in the form of educational maxims. And you'll find in Proverbs 3 and 4, we saw some of this from 3 and 4. I encourage you to read some of 4 as well. So in 4, 1 through 3, it's kind of in this educational setting. The parents are teaching their child. The child is sitting at the parent's knee, and they're getting this instruction of the advantages of diligent pursuit of wisdom. In Proverbs 4, it was like, get wisdom, take this to heart, get wisdom, sell everything and buy wisdom. Forage for understanding. What would that look like? Trust God from the bottom of your heart and don't try to figure out everything on your own. Or you may have heard that, lean not into your own understanding. Don't assume that you know it all. Or don't be wise in your own eyes. Blessed are those who find wisdom. Wisdom, she is the very tree of life to those who embrace her. Hold tight on that. It may feel like to some of you what you hear about LGBTQ people somehow threatens your masculinity or is an attack on women, but it is not. We can all fit into living in this world. I truly think our amazing world is big enough. I encourage curiosity. Seek out more understanding by having conversations. I encourage you to have conversations with LGBTQ people. Find out what their lives are like versus only hearing from the one-sided version from people who really don't know what they're talking about. From these conversations, I think you will see commonality and you will find connection. Hopefully, you will see that LGBTQ plus people are just trying to live their lives just like you're trying to live your life. There's not a gay or trans agenda to change others. The way someone lives their life may look a little different in some respects, but that does not have to affect how you live your life. Ask yourself, why should it bother me that two people who love each other want to get married? Just because it may be a man and a man or a woman and a woman? How does that diminish a man and a woman who love each other and want to get married? Some people get married, some people do not. Or if a trans woman looks manly, why should that bother you? Why can't we acknowledge that those are decisions for each individual to make as to living their authentic selves, instead of trying to live in the boxes that other people have created? Imagine what it must be like for folks who do not fit into the boxes that society has claimed is the norm. When we all know there's more to these boxes. It's a real struggle to try to live a life on the inside of being your authentic self and how you truly feel about yourself inside, and then try to live a life on the outside with others' expectations. I believe that when we have conversations, we can move from confusion to curiosity to finding out more commonality and make connections. And this, folks, can only enhance and empower your life and your community. This can bring us to what Jesus said was the greatest commandment of all, loving your neighbor as yourself. And as Claire said earlier, going from conflict to peace. Thank you.
Well, I had every intention for Bryn and I to sit and have a dialogue. I'd like to ask Bryn one question as an opportunity for us to continue this conversation. But I also know it's 11 o'clock. How'd that happen? I want to just let you know that it's been such an honor to learn from Bryn, and the beauty of Bryn's presence with us today. And I think I can I'm going to paraphrase Bryn's words. No questions are too weird, too strange, too out of bounds for Bryn. So I really do hope you'll join us in the fellowship hall so that we can continue the dialogue. Curiosity is a spiritual discipline and a spiritual gift, I believe. And so I hope you'll bring your curious natures. I'm going to just ask Bryn one question. Okay, one question. I promise we won't. I promise you won't be long. But can you just share a bit of your background, how you've made it here today?
Sure. I grew up in the Methodist Church. I grew up in rural East Tennessee, and I have lived a life as a cisgender, heterosexual woman. I was born female. I then was trying to figure out myself, and I was in my early 20s, and I lived a life as a lesbian. I was drawn to women, I was attracted to women, I lived my life as a lesbian. But there was still some piece of me that was really, really struggling. I knew since I was little, I'm a boy. I know myself to be a boy. So there was that disconnect and trying to figure that out. And again, not knowing what, no exposure, not knowing what any of that was. So it wasn't until my early 50s that I decided I have to live my authentic self. I have to be who I am. And I'm a transgender man. And I struggled with the faith community and all of that. I actually went to seminary when I was trying to figure out my sexuality and struggled with that spirituality and that sexuality. And have just always held to my heart of, this is who I am. And I'm grateful for communities that have accepted me, family that has accepted me, found an incredible, wonderful wife, and am just able to live my life. And again, I don't know how me just living my life impacts other people in a negative way.
When you and I were, when we were visiting, you told me something that you said when you were a child that your parents reminded you of. Would you will you share that with the congregation?
Sure. Unfortunately, my father was deceased when I finally came out as transgender. My mom struggled with it, and before I made any physical transition, my mother passed away. So it would have been, I think, different. Plus, I came into my own of understanding, and I wish I had had more of that understanding when I was in the journey with my parents. But my mom recalled that when I was 3 years old, a little 3-year-old doesn't have the vocabulary, but I went to my parents and said, "Think I'm Johnny." So it was the only way I could say, that was a name I latched onto and said, "Think I'm Johnny," just knowing in myself that, gosh, I'm a boy. And of course, then it was no exposure to anything. It was like, consult Dr. Spock and call your pediatrician. And, I was in a world of, it wasn't in people's realm. It wasn't talked about. It was, don't know what to do with that exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. We are going to talk more in the fellowship hall, and we're going to be talking about why pronouns are important. That's something I have asked Bryn. We've talked at that at length. We're going to talk about gender-affirming health care. We're going to talk a little bit about drag queens, because that has been a question I asked. What's all the dialogue around drag queens? And all of you are going to get a chance to ask a question as well. So once again, can we just say thank you to Bryn for being here?